Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. The Open Dialogue Foundation is a human rights NGO committed to fighting political persecution and human rights violation in the post-Soviet area. In the past few months, we have witnessed that freedom of assembly is under attack under the OSCE area and beyond. Worrying similarities in trends of repression of civil society have become evident. This summer's large-scale protests in Hong Kong have reminded us of Chinese unwillingness to accept dissent, repression, and attempts to obtain condemnation of the protests from Western and European side represented an evidence of this hostility towards civil activism. The controversial extradition law that quite understandably alarmed Hong Kong society, given China's consistent abuse of mutual legal assistance mechanisms such as Interpol's red notices, used to persecute dissidents or dissenting voices abroad. In the very same days that Hong Kongers were taking the streets, in Kazakhstan, citizens were protesting en masse against earlier presidential elections that were perceived as unfair and merely staged transfer of power entailing no substantial change in government. However, these peaceful protests were met with harsh repression and mass arbitrary detention of more than 4,000 protesters, followed by also irregular interrogations. A few weeks later, Russian civil society showed its discontent in the largest peaceful demonstrations since 2012, openly defying police forces in the street in protest against the authorities' decision to ban opposition representatives from running in the Moscow City Council. While we witness a stronger engagement from the side of peaceful protesters, we want to condemn the authorities' continued violations of the freedom of assembly and the abuse of extremism charges as a tool of political persecution. Both Russia and Kazakhstan have been using laws aimed at discouraging the incitement of extremism with a worryingly broad scope as grounds for civil or criminal persecution. In Russia, peaceful protesters are even under the real threat of being deprived of their parental rights, as was the case of Peter and Elena Homskik, who came with their children to an authorized rally on August 3rd. In Kazakhstan, for example, a 23-year-old Alimjan Izbasarov was drafted to the army after participating in the peaceful protests on May 1st, 2019. While security is the main pillar of the OSCE measures aimed at ensuring the safety in the region, should not be abused to internally repress dissent or active engagement of civil society. We invite OSCE members to openly condemn the action of the participating states that do not respect their own commitments and to react to the negative influence of, for example, Chinese practices of repression. In the case of Kazakhstan, we also ask to join the recommendations of the UN Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms while countering terrorism, who explicitly criticized the misuse of anti-extremism legislation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker on the list is the Italian Federation for Human Rights, which will be followed by the International Platform Global Rights of Peaceful People. The next speaker, Italian Federation for Human Rights. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. The Italian Federation for Human Rights organizes international human rights monitoring missions to Kazakhstan. As a volunteer of Italian Federation for Human Rights, I've been observing peaceful protests in Almaty, Kazakhstan since April 2019. Continuing peaceful protests since March 2019 ended with mass arrests and criminal prosecutions of peaceful protests. Over 6,000 peaceful activists have been subjected to political prosecutions. Participants of peaceful protests, Oksana Shevchuk, Uzipa Jalkerova, Jazira Diomeova, Anwar Ashiraliyev, and Yerkin Kasiyev are currently facing extremism charges. Preemptive detentions take place to scare people and prevent activists from participating in peaceful protests, as it happened to myself 3 times since April 2019. During those protests, people demanded to release all political prisoners, respect human rights, return the name of the capital Astana, to stop Chinese expansions, and to conduct free elections. It was said that the authorities of Kazakhstan were willing to take concrete steps in improving the situation with the right to peaceful assembly. 2 weeks after peaceful anti-Chinese protests, at least 34 peaceful activists have been subjected to administrative charges during the last 3 days. 29 of them were arrested up to 15 days for participating in the unsanctioned protest. My colleagues in Kazakhstan have met with representatives of the EU delegation to Kazakhstan and embassies of Finland, Sweden, the Netherlands, Germany, and the United Kingdom to urge diplomatic missions to publicly condemn repressions against peaceful protesters, as diplomatic missions did during the protests in Russia this summer. We're deeply disappointed that we were told that diplomatic missions were not able to do so in case of Kazakhstan and suggested we cooperate closely with the authoritarian regime of Kazakhstan. From the experience of human rights defenders, quiet diplomacy does not work with authoritarian countries unless democratic countries demand to release all political prisoners and respect the right to peaceful assembly. We welcome the adoption of the resolution of the European Parliament on the situation with human rights in Hong Kong and Kazakhstan. We found as an effective mechanism of ending repressions the introduction of Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act to the US Congress in response to mass repressions against peaceful protesters and activists in Hong Kong. We believe that the same measures could be applied to Kazakhstan in order to put an end to political repressions. We call on OSCE member states to activate embassies on the ground and to demand to release all political prisoners and stop repressions against peaceful protesters. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your intervention. The next speaker